I know the electronics for this cluster are good because every time I turn the ignition on, it moves from off to empty, so there's no problem with the dash display. But if your gauge isn't moving at all, then you should look into the electrics before you go taking the sender unit out of the tank or anything else. The first thing I'm going to do to try and fix the fuel gauge is test this connector. This purple and black wire, if that's earthed to the chassis of the car, then the fuel gauge should spring into life. Three, two, one. So the fact that the fuel gauge came on then means that there's a problem with the sender unit, which is in the tank. Now luckily for me, this is accessible through the boot rather than having to drop the tank from underneath. So I've taken the pump and sender unit out of the fuel tank, and it's quite a simple mechanism. This is the float, as it moves further and further down, you get more and more resistance, so the needle goes further down. There is a resistor behind here, and that green thing is the wiper. So as the float moves down, you get more and more resistance, which then obviously causes the needle to move further down. And turns out the problem was a brass connection underneath here, which is all corroded, so it wasn't conducting. So all I did was just wire brush that down until you could see metal again, and hopefully that will work. So if that connection was the problem, I should be able to just reconnect this onto the top of here, move the float up, and hopefully the fuel gauge should spring into life. So I've reconnected that, and now if I move the float up, as it would if it was in the tank, hopefully the fuel gauge should move. Oh yeah. So now it's just a case of putting this back in the fuel tank and screwing it back on. So I got that all back in, and I put the fuel hoses on without too much spillage. I'm going to screw this protective cover on, and hopefully it all works now it's back in the tank. With everything back together, I turned the ignition on, and the gauge worked an absolute treat.